Welcome to A Daily Word. I made a commitment early in my years of preaching and teaching. The commitment was this, that I would teach with sufficient clarity that elementary age children could essentially understand what I was teaching and preaching about, but with enough biblical fidelity that mature believers would be spiritually nourished and fed. I remember an illustration I came across during those years of a Sunday school teacher who had taught a Bible lesson to her children. They had an opportunity to draw that lesson, how they understood it, on a piece of paper with crayons. One of the children took the paper home, and the parents saw it and said, "Well, tell me about this." The child said, "Well, that was our Bible lesson today in Sunday school." "Well, interesting. What's this?" "Well, that's a car." "Okay, and who are the people in the back seat?" "That's Adam and Eve," the child said. "I see. And who's in the front seat driving?" The child said, "That's God." "Well, what's the story about?" The child simply explained, "That's God driving Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden after they sinned." That's a great illustration, not just because it's humorous, but because it helps us understand something about Bible study and what we considered in our first daily word from Psalm 1 about meditating upon the law of the Lord. Now, I came across a blog this week, actually came to my email by Dr. Fred Sanders, and it got me thinking about this. Dr. Sanders is a faculty member at Biola University, teaches at Talbot School of Theology. He is a renowned theologian, a published author on subjects like the Trinity, no small, weighty matter. If you saw Dr. Sanders at a conference and you saw him walking down the halls of the conference center, you recognized by his badge that he was a speaker, you might at first glimpse think, "Oh, there's a guy who's just heady and nerdy and a Bible geek." But you would be wrong. He is heady, but not really nerdy. He's one of the most down-to-earth theologians I have ever had the privilege of hearing and reading. Dr. Sanders is not only a theologian, but he's also something of an artist. He has written what would be considered graphic novels about the Trinity. You might be able to still find them on Amazon or eBay perhaps. But his blog this week was about a subject he calls Psalmtooning, like cartooning, only Psalmtooning. And I thought since we started with Psalm 1, this would be a good way to reinforce the idea of meditating on Scripture and thinking about it. It also reminded me of a practice of Edith Schaeffer, the wife of late Francis Schaeffer. And Edith Schaeffer used to sit in church with her children, and young children are easily bored. They don't necessarily follow along with the speaker who's teaching or preaching. But she would take a piece of paper, perhaps a book of blank pages, and during the sermon she would draw pictures to illustrate what the pastor was teaching about and preaching. And her intent was to help her children follow along and grasp some of the concepts of the message at their level. And Psalmtooning is like that. My wife, Teresa, used to do that with our young daughters when they, as PKs, had to be in church every Sunday, hearing their dad every week. And she would follow the practice of Edith Schaeffer and draw pictures when they were young to help them stay focused and learn some biblical principles at their level of ability at that point. But let me just read from a bit of Dr. Sanders' blog. He says, Psalmtooning is a form of Bible study that encourages children to use their natural love of cartooning to draw out the meaning from Scripture. Draw out, get it? His words. It works because there's a real overlap between the way kids think and the way the Bible speaks. On the one hand, you've got children's natural competence for making simple drawings that are more about ideas than about how things really look. These are cartoons, not oil paintings. And on the other hand, you've got the biblical way of speaking with vivid imagery concrete symbols and catchy figures of speech, like driving Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. When you use the former to interpret the latter, you're psalm-tooning. In the whole Bible, it's the book of Psalms that has the most conspicuous imagery and symbolism, which are already halfway to visuals. The name of the Lord is a strong tower, the psalmist writes. The righteous run into it and are safe. In addition, the Psalms feature first-person speech, which invite the reader to put themselves into the Psalms. In my distress, I called to the Lord. And the Psalms are also bite-sized. Except for a handful of very long ones, the Psalms are short, self-contained compositions. So he talks about psalm-tooning and how he has done it with his children in the past, talks about why it works. And let me just read Psalm 3. I thought this might be a good psalm to start with if you psalm-tune with your children or grandchildren, or just try it for yourself. Psalm 3 is a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. He wrote, O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Selah, or think about that. But you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Now, the reason I think that might be a good psalm to start psalm-tooning with is because of the circumstances that we're living in today. How many of you are struggling with a lack of sleep? Being apprehensive, anxious, distressed, and it's either hard to get to sleep or you wake up several times a night, or maybe you're having trouble sleeping at all. The psalmist speaks to that. In fact, Psalm 3 is considered an evening psalm, a psalm to read and pray at bedtime, because it speaks of God giving sleep. When David laid down at night, there's 10,000 enemies trying to kill him and destroy him, but God gives him sleep. And when he wakes up in the morning, he realizes that God has delivered him through the night and given him rest. And so here are the steps of psalm-tooning that Dr. Sanders recommends. First, pray. Gather your materials, a stack of blank paper, some crayons, or you can even go to the store and get these books that are bound that have blank pages. Then sit down with your children. Read the psalm through. No drawing yet. Talk about it, their understanding. Get the kids to start drawing the imagery. Laying down at night. Sleeping. Calling on the Lord. As they draw, read the psalm aloud slowly a few more times. And so they might begin drawing one thing and they'll add something else to it. Get them to explain the drawings, like that child explaining the car and the three people in the car. God was driving Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. The Psalms are so rich that you're going to be dealing with an abundance of ideas, themes, images, and issues. If you get stuck in a rut, look up some medieval examples of illustrated psalters. You just do an online search for the phrase illustrated psalters, and here's one example of that I'll post in this video. Psalm tuners aren't the first people to notice the imagery and images that go well together in the Psalms. You'll notice one important technique is to combine the written words with the drawn pictures, especially to have a giant capital letter as the frame or anchor for the image. Try it. So here's my suggestion. Parents, do this with your kids. Grandparents, do this with your grandkids. If you can't see them in person, you could do it over Skype or FaceTime. Do it for your own devotions as a form of journaling. It's really a form of meditating. You're putting into a drawing, a simple drawing, your understanding of what the text says, letting your mind mull that over, meditating on it so that you're like a tree firmly planted by streams of water. May God bless you with rest.